Welcome to Public Health Matters, where we talk about matters in public health. I'm Jane Goodman with the Division of Public Health and Community Services, and this week is Lead Prevention Week, and I'm joined by Katy Hatcher, our lead nurse.
Yes.
So perfect person to have on. Welcome, Katy.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, how long you've been working with the department and what you do as a lead nurse.
Thank you so much, Jane. I'm really happy to be here. I've been with the Division of Public Health in Nashua since this past spring. Okay. And prior to that, I worked doing lead poisoning prevention with the state of New Hampshire for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I've been an RN for 12 years, and I love it.
Yeah, that's excellent. So we're really happy that you joined us because lead is a big deal.
Yes.
So I just want to start off by asking, and we do have like a little graphic so people can see it, but why do we even care about lead poisoning? Can you just give us the ABCs of that?
Sure. So lead is a neurotoxin, mm-hmm. and it was widely used early in the 1800s, 1900s, because it's very durable. It is, was put in paint because mm-hmm. you paint something and it lasts for a very long time. In fact, it pretty much lasts forever until you take it out.
Okay.
Lead paint was banned in 1978 for residential use, so any housing that was built before 1978 very likely has some lead paint in it.
Wow.
So, lead being a neurotoxin and the housing stock in New Hampshire being so old, it is a recipe for disaster.
So what can happen if you're inhaling or ingesting the lead? I saw there's like damage to the brain and nervous system. Are there other things that can happen?
Yeah, so when we're talking about lead paint, it can be used on the exterior of homes or interior of homes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, when they think about ingesting lead paint, they think it has to be lead paint chips. And that's really not necessarily.
That's what I always think of.
Right. And that's not necessarily the case because lead paint chips can deteriorate into lead dust. And that's actually what we worry about the most because the lead dust is microscopic, so you don't see it. So a child walks over to a windowsill that's covered in lead dust, they put their fingers on it, then they put their fingers in their mouth, and then they get all of that lead dust in their body.
Okay.
And as we know, it only takes 1 grain of salt worth of lead dust to poison a child.
Yeah, so we have like a picture of the hand, you can see that it takes very, a tiny little speck.
Right. And developmentally, it's completely normal for 1 and 2 year olds to put their hands in their mouth, to put toys in their mouth. They put a lot of things in their mouth. So if there's lead dust on it and it gets in their mouth, that's a very typical, route of administration of how children are exposed.
Mm-hmm. And so if it's a neurotoxin, does it lead to behavior problems or learning problems? Like what could a parent maybe notice if their child, or maybe they wouldn't notice because that's just the way their child has always been because of this exposure, but what kind of things does this inhalation or ingestion of lead cause in kids?
That's a great question, and the scary part with lead exposures is that there's oftentimes no symptoms, and we oftentimes don't see these attention issues or behavioral issues until many years later when the children are school age. That's why it's so important that children get tested at ages 1 and 2 when they have the most hand-to-mouth behavior.
Yeah, so most of the testing is done when children are 1 and 2? Or?
Yes, in 2018, New Hampshire actually passed a universal testing law that requires all children age 1 and 2 to get tested.
Okay, so that's, now what about older kids though? I mean, I would imagine some miss that window, so is it advisable to always be up to a certain age?
Yes, up to age 6. Up to age 6 is when children are most vulnerable because their blood-brain barrier is not fully formed yet. So if a child misses their testing at age 1 and 2, or if they have higher risk factors, which would be they live in a home built before 1978, or their parents work with lead and they're at risk for what we call take-home lead. So let's say dad works in construction and he's demoing an old house that would have lead paint in it. He could have lead dust on his clothing, come home, hug his children, and transfer the lead dust to them that way. So that would be an extra risk factor. So any children that miss the testing or have the extra risk factor should definitely be checked up until the age of 6.
Okay, so we have a little graphic about where it's found, and you said houses before 1978. Peeling paint, lead dust, water pipes. Is that another risk of exposure? Is it because the pipes are lead themselves and it's in the water? How does that work?
As we saw from what happened in Flint, Michigan,
Oh, that's right.
you know, they have the corrosive controls that they use, and when the chemistry is off with that, the protective coating on the pipes can come off, and then the lead is vulnerable to seeping into the water supply with some of those pipings.
Wow. So, and then the other thing we said, occupational, you mentioned, because if you're working in that industry, you're construction, demoing
Right.
old homes, and then toys and old jewelry. Is that like old toys?
That would be older toys or toys that are imported from other countries that have different laws about lead paint.
Okay. So how do we know, like, which countries do that, or do they?
It's hard. The best thing to do would be, you know, not keeping antique toys. Some people have toys that they keep, you know, from generation to generation, you know, where they have their grandparents' toys that they want to have, you know, passed down to their children. That's not a great idea if there's any painted surfaces on it.
Okay.
Really old, you know, painted toys, you know, it would not be recommended to keep those.
Yeah, so that's an interesting family story, because my husband brought his little rocking chair from, you know, his childhood home, and I saw it was chipping and peeling, and I was like, I don't know what this was painted
Sure.
with. So I threw it away.
Yes.
And he was not happy with me.
Yes.
But then he agreed that there might have been lead paint in there, so
Right.
all is well. in the
We
home
also
front.
see that with antique furniture. You know, other painted surfaces that we see
Yeah.
for sure with antique furniture, you know, things that have been passed down from generation to generation. And I'm not saying to get rid of them, but maybe keep them in the basement where the child can't access them until they're, you know, over the age of 6, where you know they're not going to be gnawing on them.
Sure.
Or, you know, 'cause
Right.
certainly we've seen children that have, you know, chewed on windowsills that have lead paint, or have, you know, chewed on certain furniture things, and that's a huge exposure source.
Sure, sure. So how do we, it's amazing to me because it's like 100% preventable.
Yes.
So we need to give some parents some advice. What should they do?
Hand washing.
Okay.
Very frequent hand washing with soap and warm water, and a lot of friction is going to be the best way to stop exposure if you know that you have an exposure source. So if you know that there's
So that's if you know that it's in your house.
Right.
Okay.
If you're looking to move in somewhere, you know, ask a lot of questions. Has the home been tested for lead? When was it built? If it was built after 1978, you know that there's not going to be any lead paint there. If it was built before 1978, has it been tested for lead? Do you have documentation about that? When people are buying homes, you know, they think that the document that says no known lead is the same as no lead, and it's not the same. It just means that it has not been tested and they don't know. So there's a lot of feedback that I get from families, you know, where they think that their home has been tested for lead, but it hasn't been. They just signed a document saying that there was no known lead.
Now, if a property owner knows that there is lead, do they have to disclose that, or are they
Yes.
not allowed to rent the property? How does that work?
If they know that there is lead, they have to disclose it.
Okay, so it's just a written kind of thing, but you are allowed to rent that property.
You are allowed to rent the property. If a child has been identified that has had lead poisoning in that place, in a rental apartment, and it's above the action level, what will happen is that the state will put that unit under what's called administrative order, and the property owner will be mandated to do lead abatement for that unit.
All right, so I just want to get the order of things right.
Yes.
So the property owner has it tested, or they're notified. But what if are they under? I was like, is there some kind of protection? Like, do they have to get their properties tested?
No.
So that's kind of the tricky thing. So that's where we have to go to the person who's renting, the tenant, or buying, to make sure that if it's before 1978, to make sure that the property is tested. And just like you would test for other things, where I live, we test for radon and those kind of things. So just want to do your due diligence and not
Yes.
just move right in.
Right.
Especially if you know it's an older home.
Right, because it's not included in the typical home inspection. It's separate from a home inspection.
Okay, and that's important to
Yes.
know too.
Yes.
Because if you're not really testing for it, they're just really looking at outlets and other things. They're
Right.
not going to catch that.
Right.
If a house is identified with lead, and the landlord is I'm trying to say property owner instead of landlord. The owner is contacted. Are there any like can the family still stay in there? I know you mentioned washing hands. What are other things that the family can do just to be able to stay in the property while it's remediated?
So what we do at the health department is we do a lot of education with families about how to do interim controls to make it safe for the family to be there in the meantime, because it's a long process getting the apartment under administrative order. Oftentimes the property owners will apply for grants so that they can get some assistance with doing the lead abatement, because it's a pretty costly process. So that could take a pretty good amount of time. So in the meantime, we do a lot of education with the families about hand washing, proper nutrition, because if a child has any nutritional deficits, they're going to hold on to lead in their body a lot longer than a child that doesn't have nutritional deficits. We work a lot on lead safe cleaning, which is kind of counterintuitive to what you would think about regular cleaning.
Okay.
For example, if somebody has a hardwood floor, we don't want them sweeping, because if you sweep lead dust, it just kicks everything up in the air. So we talk to them a lot about wet cleaning methods. So we often provide families with things like a Swiffer to do wet mopping.
Okay.
We give out a mop and a bucket so that people can mop the floors so the lead dust gets contained with wet cleaning. We give out sponges and spray bottles, because windowsills are oftentimes one of the biggest culprits that we have for lead. So we teach them how to spray down the windowsills, wipe them down with paper towels to get the lead dust out of there. We provide duct tape. We do a lot of duct taping in homes, because creating a barrier between lead paint and the child is a really effective interim control.
Duct tape solves everything.
It does. It's a good temporary protective measure.
Yeah. So I noticed, walk us through some of the stuff that you do then. So you get a call. Is it usually the health department? Because you're working with us right now. You get a call, there's been an exposure. We talked a little bit before the show that because of COVID, you're not really going out as much. So, you're contacting the family and just walking them through the safe cleaning, the nutrition, and that kind of thing. Wipe down, I see this damp paper towel.
Yes.
I took some notes.
Yeah.
HEPA filters, I noticed. Pick up loose paint chips, you said. So then if you're in the middle of remodeling, you really don't want to be there, right? You probably have to leave the house.
Right, so the family cannot be there while the actual abatement is happening. If it's a rental situation, the property owner has to relocate the family during the abatement. Whether it's a 7 to 10 day or 2-week process, the property owner has to relocate the family, or if it's an owner occupied, the family absolutely cannot be there, because it creates so much lead dust.
Okay.
And it has to be properly cleaned before the family can return.
So the family vacates, the property owner puts them up, and that's all good. So they, I'm just looking at some of my other questions that I have. Oh, so I thought this was really interesting, because it is a neurotoxin, as you said. And we have some delays possibly that you won't notice. So you mentioned, and this is something I read up on, is that if they're under the age of 3, you want to get them into early supports. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, so we work really closely with early supports and services, which used to be called early intervention. They provide services to children birth to 3. And for this, any child that has a lead exposure qualifies for early intervention or early supports and services. They can provide a developmental assessment, which is really crucial for these children, because they are at risk for developmental delays, behavioral issues, and oftentimes we don't see these things until they're closer to school age. If we are to start seeing developmental delays, oftentimes it's with speech. That's usually one of the first ones that we see if we are going to see them. So early speech therapy is really important. So it's very important that we get early supports in place. If the child still needs services after the age of 3, early supports and services will help transition them to their local school system, which will offer them preschool.
Okay. And I saw like Head Start.
Yes, early Head Start, all of these things are extremely important because when you have a lead exposure, brain stimulating activities are just absolutely crucial to help mitigate any of the potential negative effects of lead.
So we want to, like, you know, act very quickly on that.
So anything, even the parents at home, they can just do things like singing songs or rhyming or, you know, the dollar store has these great flashcards that have, you know, apple on one side and it has an A on the other side. And, you know, anything that you can do that's a brain stimulating activity is very, very helpful.
So there's no cure for this.
Right.
It's in the child's system. It just has to come out naturally. So there was one thing I've read about chelation. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so if a child has a blood lead level that's 45 micrograms per deciliter or over, they would be admitted to, generally we refer the kids to Boston Children's for inpatient chelation. And that takes about 7 days. It's a pretty difficult process because not only does it get rid of the lead, it gets rid of a lot of other nutrients and minerals in the body. So it's very taxing for the body and it's not an easy process. So, you know, it's only proven to be beneficial for kids that have very, very high lead levels. If the child is under 45 micrograms per deciliter, we just, you know, support them with nutritional support. We refer a lot of families to WIC. So that they can get healthy foods because we want them to be eating foods that are high in calcium, iron, and vitamin C. Those are the ones that have been most beneficial in helping move lead out, but it takes months and months. It's a very slow process.
And then do you retest the child for their lead levels to make sure that they're, you know, on an upward trajectory?
We for sure test them. Depending on what their level is will depend on how often they're tested. So if the level is under 10, we'll probably recheck them every 3 months. If it's over 10, probably it would be monthly. And then if it's over 20, probably it would be, you know, monthly for longer. Because we want to make sure that they're trending down, not trending up.
So what's really interesting is that this is really a silent toxin.
Yes.
You know, and so really the impetus is on, you know, someone who's renting property to make sure that, you know, again, I'm repeating this only because there is no cure. So we want to do, the prevention is the most important. So we've, you know, the CDC has dedicated this week to lead poisoning prevention. And just really critical that parents, renters, you know, we'd like to ask the landlords too, but you know, they may not always be aware, or, but to really have that test done on the house, on the paint, on the things that are in the house, and make sure that your house is safe, especially if you have those young children. Because like you said, that the brain is not as developed yet, so they're going to really have some serious effects from this. Any other words of wisdom? What I know that we're under a little bit of a pause right now with the finger stick. You had mentioned universal testing, and that was done with a little prick to the finger. But we have a little bit of a recall right now. So what are the options for testing?
So for right now, there's a recall on the finger stick testing supplies. So that's not happening right now, which is unfortunate because that was a very easy and quick way to get lead testing done. So there's a little bit of a pause on that. We can still do the venous blood draws, which is the blood draw that you have done in your arm. That's how my kids both had their lead testing done when they were younger. And that's the most accurate way to get it done. It's not the most pleasant way to get it done, but it's very accurate, and it's crucial that we get these kids tested because there's oftentimes no symptoms, and there's no other way to know if these kids are exposed to lead. Prevention is the best way, but oftentimes we don't have control over that. So early detection is the next best thing that we can do.
Right.
We've got to get these kids tested.
Absolutely. So for those of you with young children, if they have not been tested, if they're over the age of 2 and they still have not been tested, this is, and you're living in one of those older homes, this is really the time. Or if you're in a construction industry and coming home with dust all over you and you're not sure what's in that dust, now is the time.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming on and
It's my pleasure.
sharing this information with us. It's so critical, especially, things that are unseen.
Yes.
Such as a virus.
Yes.
Really throw people for a loop. So what do we do? Prevention really is the best thing that we can do.
Right, and especially during the time of COVID, especially in the beginning when everybody was home, if you have lead dust in your home, the more time you spend at home, the more exposure you have. So we definitely saw an increase of lead poisoning and lead exposures during this pandemic.
Oh.
So it's been difficult. So
Yeah,
get
so
your kids tested.
Keeping you busy. So
Yes.
especially, so if you were home a lot, and again, in that older housing stock, take the initiative to get that blood draw done.
Yes.
And Katie, we'll look forward to having you back again.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it also.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
And thank you. We'll be right back with our next guest.
We'd like you to strip off this wallpaper and resurface the walls beneath before repainting.
I have to ask, when was this house built?
1968, we think? Yeah.
We might have a problem. Houses built before 1978 might have lead-based paint in them.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. Lead from old paint can get into the environment, especially during home renovations, sanding, scraping, window replacement. Those kinds of activities can create hazardous lead dust and chips that could poison your child and put your family at risk.
Oh, should we get Emma tested?
For that, you should talk to your pediatrician. Regarding the house, we can test for lead-based paint as a lead-safe certified contractor. Lead-based paint can be found on interior walls, doors, and even window casings. Exterior surfaces, too. Even the soil around your home's drip line can be affected. The EPA has a lot of good information to help homeowners deal with lead-based paint. Prevent lead exposure. Go to epa.gov/lead to learn more.
Welcome back to Public Health Matters, where we talk about matters in public health. I'm Jane Goodman with the Nashua Division of Public Health and Community Services. And as you've probably heard already, it's Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. So I'm joined now by Carrie Schena, who is the Urban Programs Manager. Did I say that right, Carrie?
You did. Thank
Okay.
you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, the Urban Programs Manager for the City of Nashua, who a little bit before the program, you said you came to Nashua to work on a lead prevention grant. So tell me about what you do for the city first, and then we'll talk a little bit about lead.
Okay. So, yeah, I came to the city about 14 years ago now, 13 or 14, and that was when the city received its first HUD lead grant. And we apply for those grants competitively. We're now on our 5th grant. And in total, the grants have brought about $17.5 million into the community, specifically to address lead paint. More recently, we can also do some healthy housing remediation with those grant funds. And the current grant started almost a year ago in December. It's our largest yet, $5.7 million.
Wow.
So we can take that grant. We're going to do at least probably about 250 housing units. And we have the lead paint program that's through Urban Programs. You said to say a little bit about what the other things we do
Yeah,
are.
tell me the others, because we'll come
Yeah.
back to the lead.
Yeah. So it's easy to dive right into the lead stuff. We also, Urban Programs overall sees most of the HUD funds that come into the city. And HUD is Housing and Urban Development. So basically those funds come into the city and we roll them out into the community. Generally they have a focus on lower income households and benefit the community in that way. Internally we have a housing rehab program that we operate, which complements very well with the lead paint. Obviously we have the lead paint program. We focus a lot on affordable housing. We do a lot of planning. Long range and short range to see, what those needs in the community are. How should we best spend our federal dollars? Each year we do an application cycle for what we call CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grant Funds.
Yeah.
The city is an entitlement community, which means we get CDBG and home dollars automatically. It's formula based. So on the CDBG program, we take that and accept applications, generally from the nonprofits in the community. Part of that money goes out to supporting their operations. A good portion of it goes out to improving their facilities so that they can continue to serve clients. That is how our housing rehab program is funded. And on the home side, which is another federal source from HUD, that's all about affordable housing. So typically that's larger scale development, whether it be senior housing, low income housing. We work with partners such as NeighborWorks and other developers in the community. So really it's great work. We see an immediate impact. I've been so fortunate to be part of all these programs. You know, we see families, we see what the work does, and it's very rewarding.
Yeah, so I was just reading some statistics that were put together for me around the housing issue, because we're looking at our community health improvement plan, and we know that housing is a huge issue. So when you mentioned affordable housing, our vacancy rate is like 0.3%, which means we have a lot of work to do. So, you know, housing is such a big issue.
It is. It is. The city right now, like most places really across the country, are facing just such extreme challenges with vacancy rates. And that just makes for a very competitive market. And so the folks who, you know, really can't afford market rents get squeezed out, and it is a difficult situation. So we're working really hard on that. The city is in the process of, we created a housing trust fund just several months ago, and we're in the process of figuring out where continuing funds will come from for that, what exactly that will do. But we really hope that that's going to supplement some of those home dollars that I just talked about as well, and that coupled with low-income housing tax credits at the state level. So it really takes, we call it the kitchen sink approach.
Right.
You know, we see these development proposals come in, and really they have funding sources from all over to make these projects happen.
Right, right. So you are very, very busy. So we're going to talk about lead. We just had a lead nurse on who kind of explained to us about housing before 1978, and you know, so in Nashua, is that a huge amount of the housing? Just give us a general ballpark idea. Or?
It really is. Nearly half of all of the housing built in Nashua was built before 1978. Wow. There was a little bit of a housing boom in the 80s, and then things slowed at a more steady pace after that. But part of what the issue is, I think that's somewhat unique to Nashua, is when the city developed, it developed as a mill town. And all around the river and surrounding the mills that we're familiar with, Cotton Mill and places like that, was worker housing. And so this is what we think of as our downtown area, or our tree streets. French Hill is much the same. And when these homes were built, they were beautiful homes. They were built as 2, 3, sometimes 4 families, but they were middle-income worker housing. And over time, that has become our affordable housing.
I see.
And it's predominantly our rental housing.
Okay.
So we have an overlay in Nashua where we have our oldest housing stock at the city center, and that's our predominant rental stock. And at this time, it's really gotten into a point where it's in disrepair. So many of those units haven't been kept up over the years. If you think about a beautiful old Victorian, you know, they can be wonderful. They cost a lot of money to maintain and a lot of time. And so that isn't normally resources that some landlords have, or renters obviously wouldn't have those either. So it's sort of the perfect storm in Nashua, where we have this culmination of factors all just occurring in one little spot. So really we target our assistance in those areas. And
in those neighborhoods specifically?
In those neighborhoods specifically, you know, just to give you a taste of what the grant does, it really will serve anywhere in the city. It's not geographically based, and we can talk more about that. But, you know, again, because of the older housing stock being primarily concentrated in those Tree Street and French Hill areas, that's where the majority of our work is.
So, so you have these. You said something about rehabilitating the homes. So, tell me how do you find people that need their homes rehabilitated?
Yeah.
Or I guess that's to make it simple. I was talking to Katy before you, and I said, you know, I hope we're not waiting until we get a report of a child with elevated blood lead levels. So how how does the city access these groups?
Yeah. So when we first started, there was a lot of work to do on outreach. Lead paint really wasn't on a lot of people's minds, and quite honestly, it still isn't. It's a very silent and very extremely preventable disease that affects children. And even in the medical profession, it tends to be, and Katy may have touched on that, something that falls to the bottom of the list. There's so many childhood issues that bubble up to the top, and often lead is not one of them. So the way that we identify them is over the years we've worked really hard with so many partners to do outreach. The Division of Public Health obviously is one of our strongest partners. They're on the ground.
We like to hear that.
Yeah, well, you're out doing those lead tests, you're in the community. So we work with them as one primary partner, doing health fairs. We have representation that way. And we get our information out through pamphlets and websites. The other big way that we reach people is through our nonprofit partners as well. And we look to them, especially the transitional housing providers in the city, really because they have the target population that we want to assist. So you have families with young children who are in transitional housing programs, and their next step is to move into an apartment to have permanent housing. That's a perfect moment for us, a teaching moment, and we work with the nonprofits to do that, to help them understand that when they're searching for housing, they should be looking for something that's lead safe. We partner with the Nashua Housing Authority. They have a voucher program. And so the way that works is if tenants qualify for that voucher program, they can take that voucher and go rent anywhere they want. That's another teaching moment. And they work with them to, again, say, if you're out picking an apartment, please choose somewhere safe.
Now, is that a requirement? That's Section 8 housing that you're referring to? Is that a requirement of using that voucher that it's lead tested, or is it not?
It's actually not in New Hampshire. The way the law is written here is that it's very reactive law. So in Massachusetts, for example, a landlord cannot rent to a family with a child under 6 if their home has not been remediated. In New Hampshire, you can do it, but you have to disclose the possibility that lead could be there. And really, there is supposed to be some information provided to the tenants so that they can understand how to live in that unit safely. We know that doesn't happen.
Right.
So really, that's where our work comes in, and working with the huge list of landlords through the Housing Authority, through our realtors, and really getting in even into the corner store and putting notices up. We try a variety of tactics to let people know about our program.
And are you able to reach out to, we have a very large Latino community in Nashua now that may be in rental housing, might be immigrants or refugees or however they've come to our great city. So how are we reaching out to those families? Just because that's a totally foreign thing to understand,
It is, and really depending on where some of the immigrant population comes from, lead and lead paint or dangerous paint may be a concept they don't even understand.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right, and they come from a completely different world where they wouldn't even think about that. So again, actually, this is where the Division of Public Health comes into play for us, and does some of that refugee work, and the name escapes me of the agency who does help resettlements, and lead paint is one of them. Through the refugee program, they are tested for lead as they enter the system.
Okay.
So that we're making sure we're not putting a vulnerable population in a more hazardous condition. But as far as the Latino population and Spanish speaking, we have a lot of Portuguese speakers as well. So we do have our materials translated. We have staff on board that can speak the languages, which is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really when it comes to applying, I know we'll get to that as well, but we take an open door approach. So really, however people can get the information to us, we'll take it,
So who's applying to you for this money? Is it a family, or is it the landlord, or how is that? How does that work?
It has to be the landlord who actually does the application as the owner. We do receive calls from tenants, and if they're comfortable providing the landlord's name, we'll reach out and let them know about the program and that there's an interest. If not, then we ask them to just direct the landlord to us. But quite honestly, it's the landlords who are the ones coming to us. And to get to the point you said earlier about not waiting and being reactive on our end, we do try really hard to get to the homes before children are poisoned. Sadly, right now, and for a number of reasons, the pandemic being one, and people being at home a lot more than they ever have been, we certainly have a large number of poisoned children in our queue right now.
Right. Yeah, that's what Katy had mentioned. Because
Right.
people are at home.
Yep, and we anticipated that. We knew, so again, not only are children home a little bit more, and they were home for many months, people were probably also postponing doctor appointments, and so they weren't getting the screening that they needed to know that there was a problem. And so as things sort of resumed, we anticipated seeing this increase. And thankfully, we had the new lead grant, which has great resources to be able to address it. When we get a case that's poisoned, we do get that referral through the state. And they do kind of like a soft handoff to our program. And those cases rise to the top, and we put those ahead of any others.
So that's kind of the cue. Like, if you get notified by the state, you're going to contact that landlord no matter what, because they're going to know where that child resides and who they're living.
Yep,
they're
yep.
renting from.
It's technically that the state is giving them our information, and normally on site when they're meeting with the landlord, they'll say, "Hey, Nashua has this grant program, and if it's okay with you, I'll connect you." And so we often will get an email from the state with the landlord right on the email, and then we just take the ball and run with it at that point. And really, the state of New Hampshire is another one of our very strong partners. Not only do they do case management and give us those referrals, but New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority also has a lead grant program. And so we don't double dip on the grant, but they have a loan program. And when we talk about some of the costs associated, they're a resource where we can pull in some gap funding as well.
Okay. So they can loan money to the property owner to
Right.
fix the problem. So is it always loans, or is it ever you can apply for this amount and get the paint out and the dust?
Nope, so our program is a grant. It's just an outright grant. What we ask for in return is the minimum of what HUD tells us. It's that they will rent to low-income families for 3 years and give priority to families with children under 6, because we're making the house lead safe. We want to see the kids living there. So just to give you a tip, a run through of how the whole thing works. The landlord, and most of the landlords are voluntary. They are coming into our program because they've heard about it or they've done other units. So they come in and they apply. We do have to also income qualify whoever lives in the property, and that's making sure that low-income folks are benefiting from this program. That really is the hardest part of our job, is obtaining all that paperwork from the tenants, especially in a large multifamily.
Sure.
But that's where we take the anything approach. If you want to take a photo with your cell phone and send us a picture of your pay stubs and just send it over to us that way, we'll take it. If you're a little more savvy and can scan things in, if not, drop them off at City Hall. If not, we'll come to your house and pick them up. We really want to make it as accessible as possible.
Right.
And so once we qualify folks, then we get the green light. The program pays for a lead inspector. We have a contractor who does that. They come in and they test every surface in the home, every painted surface. And it takes several hours, and it's very thorough. Following the inspection, we have staff in-house who develop a scope of work, and that's going to talk about how those surfaces need to be remediated. And we put it out to bid. We oversee that whole part of the project. If they need gap funding, we work with the landlords to find those resources. A lot of them bring in their own private funds. Others, like I said, take advantage of the state program. We do have some limited dollars in-house that we can offer. So somehow we cobble it all together, that kitchen sink approach. And then when the work actually occurs, we give plenty of notice. We don't ever just show up and bounce somebody out. But the tenants do have to be out, or the occupants have to be out while the work occurs.
And how does that get covered? Katy said the landlord is responsible for that, but what if,
Right. So again, if they're coming through our program, we offer the tenants a stipend of $350 for the inconvenience. We know it's a hassle.
For a month or for?
Just a one time.
Okay.
So they're generally out no more than 10 days.
Okay.
And we try to make it less than that if possible. And depending on the scope of work, it's going to dictate. When the work is completed, they go back in and they take dust wipe samples, which go to a lab to verify that it is in fact safe to move back in and there's no traces of lead. And so what we've also been doing because of the pandemic, we used to just ask folks to stay with family or friends, and that doesn't work now.
Right.
So we are reimbursing landlords for the cost of hotels up to a certain amount per night. And so that's been successful so far. I mean, under our new grant, we've already cleared about 47 units, and we have another 40 or so in queue. So we're still making it work, despite all those challenges.
We've all had to reinvent how we do things because of the pandemic. And so you have this over $5 million. Is it over how many years, or is it?
It's a 3.5-year grant.
Okay.
And so we're almost coming up on a year now, so we have a bit more to go and a lot more units to do.
So you should do several hundred homes probably by the end of this.
Yeah, we hope to do about 250
Yeah.
actual units. I mean, there's tens of thousands of them that need to be done, so
Wow.
we've got lots of work.
Yeah, so I guess it's job security for you, but it's also, a lot to do. So if there is a home owner or a property owner that wants, they can just call your office?
Absolutely. All the information is on the Urban Programs website,
Okay.
which is the City of Nashua's site. You can just do a quick Google Nashua Lead Paint Program, and it'll bring you right there.
Okay, great, because we want people to take advantage of this while we do have the funding in the area. We do want to keep those kids safe, and it's a really interesting program that you have to income qualify the tenants in order to do the remediation. But I guess, if those are the homes that are right now low income and in disrepair, then we have to have a system to do that. So this is great. Is there anything else you want to add about the program or how people can reach you beyond, looking on the city's website?
Yeah, I mean, all of our phone numbers are there, so.
Oh, no, don't worry about that.
Okay. So yeah, all our phone numbers are on there. Feel free to call us. We're very accessible. We'll use our cell phones as well. We do night calls, weekend calls, whatever it takes, and we're really encourage people, like you said, to take advantage of the grant while we have it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie. Thank you. You were very busy. You were responding to an emergency before we started the show, so I'll let you get back. And, thank you for sharing this with us. So important that we do this prevention and that we keep our kids safe and our families safe so they can grow into healthy humans and give back to our community as well. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. And we'll see you next week.